If you've ever played or watched Guilty Gear Xrd, you'll know that it's a mechanically rich game. There's a universal mechanic for just about every situation, and that's one of the things that drew me in as someone that loves to lab. When Strive was originally announced, there was a lot of discussion around simplification. We now know the results of these talks, but at the time it was interesting to see what people deemed as arbitrarily complex. Even though I sit sometimes on the side of deliberately convoluted games, I still think it's a really important topic. It's a new game, not everything's going to stay, and if they're going to remove something, you want it to be a thing that doesn't add any value. There was one mechanic that was highlighted a fair amount, but I felt was underexplored.
Wah variable wake up timings. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot.
If you've never played Xrd, you probably wouldn't know, but there are a couple of important things to note when you knock someone down. People wake up at different speeds if they land on their back or their front, and the time it takes for them to get up is different depending on the character. The range of these differences is about 10 frames at very most. Xrd, unlike the majority of modern fighters, and to be honest even old ones, does not have tech options when you get knocked down. No roll, no specific wake up attacks, you stand up and that's it. Tech options are important, and if we put back the clock by a couple of years and look at Street Fighter 4 before Ultra came out, we can see why. The meta of mix-ups in that game simply evolved into hard knockdown, ambiguous cross-up or safe jump option select. The strength of these options was not just the mix-up potential, but the consistency. A universal knockdown timing made it so you could just use whiff buttons to create frame-perfect setups for perfect mix-ups, and it would work on everyone. For powerful characters like Ibuki, it ultimately meant that you saw the same setup over and over again, regardless of who the opponent picked. Even when there was a manually timed element to the mix-up, it was still a very tangible goal to make it frame perfect. What variable wake-up timing means in Guilty Gear is there are fewer universal setups. Where you might get a safe jump versus Bedman's 30 frame wake-up, you might not versus Ino's 20 frame wake-up. You're not going to see the same mix-up used versus both, and this ultimately adds value to when something is character specific. You're also going to have a much harder go of manually timing something. Let's say you want to do a meaty overhead with Axel. It's absolutely possible to do, but do you trust yourself to do it in a high pressure situation? Maybe not. If you can though, it's a trained skill that should be celebrated. Dizzy's mix-ups for me are a perfect example of why wake-up timings add to the experience for both players and spectators. After her sweep, she can cancel into beam. Go for a cross-up or go for a fake cross-up. This is only meaty versus some of the casts however, meaning it could be countered by, say, an air throw. So instead, we have to set up the beam differently or use a fish to meaty, resulting in a different conversion and a different mix-up. This simple distinction stops Dizzy from doing the same thing versus everyone. You're not seeing just one safe setup and a couple of gimmicks, the safe mix-up is actually the thing that's changing. This all being said, it does not mean that universal setups don't exist, they absolutely do and characters are designed around it. Look at Kai for example. The 59 active frames on Grinder is not going to be affected by this, he is still going to slap you with a standing low. It deliberately exists to make it hard for characters without good Oki tools to be consistent by adding a possible element of human error. Now let's look at the weirdly more talked about issue of face up and face down knockdowns. Simply put, certain attacks will give you one of these two knockdowns. The same way a crush counter sweep will give you a hard knockdown in Street Fighter 5, but a DP won't. The difference in these two wake up timings when you look at an individual character don't really amount to anything. In any fighting game when you're in training mode at the start, you'll do a move that knocks him over and see if you can get a mix up off it. All of these moves have different recovery and different pushback. You don't know if you can get a mix up until you try. Guilty Gear is the exact same. You're not mid-match trying to see if they've got knocked over face up or face down. Like any fighting game, you've tested it and you know which moves do what. Some fighting games have led people to believe that they need to be exact with everything. Combos should be max damage, Oki should be frame perfect, every setup should be optimal, and until you can do all of that, you should lock yourself away in team mode. Realistically, there are going to be more accessible setups that should work as a foundation for more nuanced things later down the line. Absolutely, if you show a new player the table of all these different wake up timings, they're gonna be overwhelmed, but the question should be, why are they seeing it in the first place? With any game that's deemed as hard by the public, A lot of the time the issue is people go into it, load up training mode, load up a bunch of frame data and think they can learn the game that way. To learn these games, you just need to learn the real basic stuff. Don't need to optimize combos, you don't need weight class specific combos. All of that comes later. The whole thing is playing the game and adding bits into your game plan when you need it. You're not going to be able to learn them all at once, and unfortunately that narrative pushes people away from these games. The benefits of top players being able to define themselves with hard and specific mix-ups, the newer players not hyper-focusing on frame perfect mix, and the diversity of setups across the cast, for me, outweighs all of the negatives to this mechanic.